The Shia are emancipated. They have control of their own affairs. And this is also having a major impact in other parts of the Middle East, where there are large Shia populations, in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia, in some of the Gulf states, in Syria. There is an awakening of the Shia, which is to some extent and among some circles in sympathy with Iran, the great Shia state, but even among those who are against Iran, who reject Iranian aggression, nevertheless the awakening of the Shia and the possibility of the Shia establishing control in their own countries has created a new situation.
What does it mean for Iraq today?
Iraq is not Shia dominated.
What does it mean? I mean, you've spoken about the sensitivity of situations in which Shia and Sunni both meet.
Yes.
And in Iraq, certainly, they meet together with their Kurdish neighbors. You know,
Right.
how is Iraq doing, Bernard, 7 years after the invasion?
It's difficult to say, but on the whole, I feel what has been happening, in spite of all the difficulties, is not too bad. On the whole, I think that in spite of the really enormous difficulties of creating a civilized, more or less democratic regime in a country with that sort of history, I think they've done remarkably well.
Do you see elements, you see Iraq as a much freer country today?
Oh yes, certainly. I mean, remember what came before. This is the country which was ruled by Saddam Hussein.
What about, I want to stay on this theme of freedom. This has been a theme that freedom and democracy in the Middle East, and turn to Iran for a moment, and the troubles that the Iranian regime is facing, the green opposition movement. How do you see that movement? What is this opposition movement? Compare it to the opposition movement in the Shah, before the Shah fell.
And thanks to the wonders of modern technology, one can really know quite a lot about what's going on, even inside a dictatorship. And all the evidence is that the movement of opposition to the present regime in Iran is very strong and very widespread. Evidence is that the regime has become extremely unpopular for good and obvious reasons. And there is, I think, much that one can do to help the opposition and bring about a change, not by armed invasion, which would be the worst way, but by internal change.
What needs to happen for that? I mean, you have the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Force, the Basij, hundreds of thousands of women and men who are armed, brutal, under the direct order by the regime. How can an opposition win in that situation? What needs to happen? And do they want freedom and democracy, or do they just want to get rid of Ahmadinejad?
Well, there are two oppositions. There are two kinds of opposition in Iran. There's the opposition within the regime, and there's the opposition to the regime, or against the regime. And obviously the second one is better, but the first one would do for the time being.
I want to talk about for a moment the roots of Muslim rage. The roots of Muslim rage, an article that you wrote in The Atlantic, which then became the basis of a book you wrote in 2002, if I'm not mistaken, called The Crisis of Islam. And there was What Went Wrong, another book that came out, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, a year later, trying to get a sense of what are the roots of Muslim rage that perhaps led to the 9/11 attacks. Where are we in terms of understanding that rage today? Is the rage soaring? Is it decreasing?
It's mutating. And that, I think, is good. Let me explain what I mean. As I remarked earlier, in the Islamic world in general, and the Arab world in particular, there is a very strong sense of history, a very strong awareness of history. If you look at the propaganda put out by both Iraq and Iran during the long war between those two countries, propaganda is full of historical allusions to events that took place in the 7th century. Can you imagine conducting propaganda in America or even in Europe by making swift passing allusions without explanation to events in the 7th century? But they do that. There is this awareness of history. And the basic perception, the basic Muslim perception of history, is an ongoing struggle between the true believers and the unbelievers. The true religion was vouchsafed to them, they were given that privilege, and in return it is their duty not to keep it selfishly to themselves like the Jews do, but to bring it to all humanity, removing whatever obstacles there may be in the way. So this led to and I suppose in fairness one should add that in Christendom there was a rather similar perception. So this led to an ongoing series of wars between the two triumphalist religions. And the term triumphalist is applied to religions as this. Some religions are what's called relativist. That means you have your faith, I have my faith, we recognize each other. The Jewish religion famously says that it's in the Talmud, and that in paradise there is a place for the righteous of all peoples. That is rejected as odious by the triumphalists. The triumphalist view is that there is only one faith. We, whoever the we may be, are the fortunate recipients of God's final message to humanity, which we must bring to the rest of the world. That was the Christian view, that was the Muslim view. And where you had two religions with similar self-perceptions side by side, there was inevitably an ongoing struggle between them. Now, in the Christian world, that perception and that self-perception has long since not disappeared, but diminished to unimportance. That is not how most Christians in Europe or elsewhere see the world. It is still very much the point of view of a large and growing section of the Muslim world who feel that as the fortunate recipients of God's final message, they must continue the struggle which began during the lifetime of the Prophet and can only end when all the world either embraces Islam or submits to Muslim rule. Now, you asked me before about the term harb. Harb in Arabic means war. It's obviously related to the Hebrew word for a sword. According to the traditional presentation, the world is divided into two: Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb, the house of Islam and the house of war. The house of war meaning the rest of the world, which has not yet had the good fortune to be conquered by the Muslims. And between the two, there is, as I said, inevitably a perpetual state of war which must continue until the final triumph of Islam. Now, this state of war may be interrupted by truces, but cannot be ended by any real peace. Truce is usually called sulh, and this was the term used to legitimize situations where a Muslim government found it necessary, for good practical reasons, to reach some accommodation with its non-Muslim neighbors.
What about Turkey, Bernard? Where are we with Turkey? There's a great debate in this country, as there is in other Western circles, about whether Turkey has left the West permanently. What is happening in Turkey?
Well, I think I wouldn't go that far at the present moment, but certainly there are dramatic changes going on in Turkey. As you know, in Turkey there was a revolution back in the early 20s, which turned what had been the last relic of the Ottoman Empire into a secular modern republic. And this was challenged several times by religious movements in the course of the years. Now, for the first time, the challenge has become a major threat to the whole Kemalist heritage. I mean, the leaders of the present religious movement in Turkey have been very, very skillful in their work, in dealing with the economy, the bureaucracy, the police, the academy, they've virtually taken over almost everything except the judiciary and to some extent the army. And it's quite clear that they do command massive support in the country. I think it's too soon to say that they have won the battle, but at the moment I think one can say they are doing pretty well. I can even imagine a situation in which Turkey and Iran change places, in which Turkey becomes the modern secular democracy, in which Iran becomes the modern secular democracy, and Turkey becomes the religious state.
Finally, Bernard, we have just a few more minutes, just a couple of more minutes. I want to ask you about freedom and democracy in the Middle East. Freedom and democracy in the Middle East. As we look forward, how optimistic are you that the region can embrace even cultural and religiously specific notions of freedom and democracy?
Not long ago I gave a lecture to an American audience, and I was asked this question. And I said I would say that my position is one of cautious optimism. My optimism derives from there, my caution from here.
I don't think there's any more to say at this moment. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause to Professor Bernard Lewis. Thank you all very much.